You're watching Invest Africa. Now, Nigeria's Vision 2020 is aimed at making Nigeria one of the world's 20 largest economies by 2020. Various reforms such as economic liberalization, deregulation and privatization of state-owned enterprises will continue to be implemented over the next 8 years in order for the country to realize its economic dream.
Nigeria is one of the nations that have flown below the radar for investors, and in years to come it is anticipated that the country will stand out as one of the economic powerhouses. Although Nigeria still grapples with rehabilitating its infrastructure, it has carefully targeted investments that will drive economic growth.
Investment is slowly filtering through Nigeria in terms of activity on the continent, infrastructure-wise, is one of the countries who are doing the most to get things back on track. But they certainly have a lot of challenges just based on their population, and from that demand point of view, you know, people are requiring a lot of electricity. So the infrastructure has fallen behind, but they are doing well to catch up, and they've also opened themselves up to support from the rest of the continent, which is a very good and important thing that they've done.
Nigeria has one of the fastest growing telecommunications market in the world. Major emerging market operators like MTN have based their largest and most profitable centers in the country.
Each country is different, and we have grown to know, and it's actually now developed into our DNA, to make sure that we innovate to a specific market. You need to do research and understand a particular market in a particular country, and then come up with services products and services that are specifically tailor-made for that market. Some products are general and can be adapted easily from market to market, but some need to be specific to what the customers in that particular market are looking for.
However, to improve prospects for success, potential investors must educate themselves extensively on local conditions and business practices.
We have regular communication with our distributors to make sure that we understand what their needs are, how can we assist them in running more efficient and more effective businesses, while it helps them develop, while it brings economic development in their lives and in their families. It also helps us to make sure that we get our products out there to the people. So it's a win-win situation. And as I say, each country is unique. There are basics that we learn from one country to the next, but you really need to understand a particular country that you're in to be able to make sure that you maximize your offerings and your partnerships with that particular community.
The Nigerian government has also recently begun expanding its infrastructure to space-based communications. Such technologies have been instrumental in connecting rural and urban areas,
helping people in remote and rural areas get access to the kind of quality broadband that brings them new access to education, employment and healthcare information.
The growth in Nigeria's ICT sector has opened various avenues for investment opportunities. However, this growth could soon begin to decline if the poor power supply is not addressed.
Yes, those are real challenges, but then you look at them and say, what else can I come up with which will not only enable me to do business, but that will also benefit the community, and that will also benefit the country and the world in us getting greener, as opposed to just sticking out and just getting generators running all the time, more especially in Nigeria, because in the past we'd have seen it's a lot easier to do that because diesel is subsidized, although that's going away. But even with that, you need to be looking at what are the alternatives that are good for the environment and that makes good business sense.
As the big headliners for economic growth lose their appeal, the search for new stars has begun, and enhancing regulatory frameworks, rebuilding and maintaining infrastructure will ensure that Nigeria is ready to take centre stage. Dubisha Mahanyele, Johannesburg.
Thanks again to Misha. Now, still with me in the studio is Dianna Games. She's CEO, Africa at Work, and Joel Chimhanda, his principal, JC Capital, and Suresh Chaytoo, Sector Director, Banks and DFIs for Africa and Latin America at RMB. Let's begin before we move on to the other discussion, which we'll take at the end of the program, just look at the opportunity that Nigeria represents. I mean, we talk different numbers here. I just hit just under 200 million people in terms of population. So it's a large population. We're talking about the 41st largest economy in the world. Let's outline those investment opportunities in Nigeria. Let me begin with you from a banking perspective. Just quickly, if you can run us through those investment opportunities.
Godfrey, the bankable population in Nigeria, if you just look at the amount of people banked.
Speaking like a true bank.
10% of Nigerians are actually banked.
Right.
So this represents a huge opportunity for the banking sector. Again, growing middle class, coupled with very weak infrastructure and growing infrastructure needs, presents another huge opportunity in various infrastructure sectors for the bank. We've been dealing for the past 10 years in Nigeria, and in starting up an investment bank in Nigeria, what we really wanted to do is we've already identified the opportunities for growth in these various sectors, and want to obviously capitalize on those opportunities by working with both local and international banks to actually bring some of the visions that the government has set in Nigeria to the fore. Yeah.
Joel, I know you've identified infrastructure, and particularly power is the key, but from where you stand as an investor, if you can.
For us, we identified 4 broad areas. Okay. The first area is energy, power, infrastructure.
Right.
The second area is real estate, and I'm talking property where you have residential, you have commercial, and you have retail.
Okay.
And the third subsector that we identified is the mid-cap SMEs. And in that subsection, we are looking at companies that are sitting in the manufacturing, in the agro-processing, and in the mineral beneficiation subsector. And our strategy is based on identifying the entrepreneur who has identified the opportunity, and our value proposition is to bring the capacity from a financing perspective, from the technical partners perspective, to bring bankability to an idea that comes from $1 million PAT to a $20, $30 million PAT over a 10-year period.
That's profit after tax?
Yes.
Okay. Dianna, you probably know more than all of us about what investment opportunities are in Nigeria, given your role as ordinary CEO of the SA Nigeria Chamber of Commerce. Give us a quick one. Have they left anything out?
Well, obviously infrastructure is a key across the board.
Is it the biggest though? It is.
I think certainly in terms of money, I would say it is. I think power is absolutely crucial. A lot of manufacturers in Nigeria will tell you that their biggest headache is actually getting long-term money, and that is a role that obviously all the sort of money that's coming in through private banks and so on will play. But apart from that, ICT is still a very fast-growing. You're looking at all kinds of new uses is a better word for it on mobile phones, and that area is still growing very rapidly, and people are just constantly looking for new applications and so on. Retail, real estate, definitely. I think that's across, because I think people often forget about the rest of the country. And what has happened is all the states now have you've got much better governance in the states, not all of them, but say even in 10 states. And there's a lot of money ready for investment at a state level. So instead of talking about Lagos or even Abuja, you are talking 10 different places, Akwa Ibom, the Niger Delta, there is crime still there, but we haven't discussed security, but and so on. So I think that almost everything, and I talk to people right down to the smallest kind of goods that you can sell through to beer, SAB Miller's building its brewery there. Fast-moving consumer goods. I was just actually last week at the opening of the new shop right in Abuja, and within an hour that car park and the shop were absolutely bursting at the seams. So there's just everything there's opportunity at every level that just needs feeding, I suppose.
Unbelievably, we've just run out of time. Even the ranking that I wanted us to do in the discussion around security and all the other opportunities, unfortunately, we'll have to reserve them for another day. We've come to the end of this week's edition of Invest Africa. We'll be back at the same time next week. Until then, I'm Godfrey Mutizwa.